Hey guys, Uncle Unit here. Before the video starts, I just want to give you a heads up that two of the stories featured in this episode are repeats. They were originally single story videos on this channel, but they both got falsely copyright claimed by some company, and I decided rather than waiting for the 30 days for YouTube to reverse the claims, I would just go ahead and re-record the stories and put them into a new video. So if you feel like you've heard some of these before, chances are you probably have. I'll have some timestamps in the pinned comment if you don't feel like hearing them again. And without any further delay, enjoy. This took place in October of 2019 at a big weekend gathering. A woman from Lebanon became my permanent 24-hour nurse, and they all considered me part of the family and wanted to throw me a welcoming party. She became my nurse since my terminal illness was starting to progress ever since I became an adult. The thing to know about a Lebanese-style gathering is that there is always a lot of people there. The gathering was hosted at her sister's home, since the house was big enough to accommodate everyone. So me, my nurse, and my service dog Mandy all attended the gathering. I want to give you an idea of how Mandy is and what she looks like. She is a very big German Shepherd. She has to be big because I'm a fall risk. She can be very intimidating and protective, but for the most part, she's very sweet. She is very good with people that don't seem threatening, and she does really well with kids. We always call her Mama Mandy because of how gentle and protective she is. When we pulled up to the house, we saw a lot of cars in the driveway. My nurse told me that they're all here to welcome me to the family. As soon as we walked in, I noticed right off the bat, the house was filled with a lot of people. Mandy was a little apprehensive at first, but when she got the idea that I was safe, she mellowed out a bit. The party was great, and I had a lot of fun, and got quite a bit of gifts, but there was one person at the party that seemed a bit out of place. I tried to talk to him and introduce myself, but when I would try to get close, Mandy would stop moving, and it's kind of difficult when your walking support doesn't want to work with you, so I just kind of gave up. During the party, I had a small glass of wine, and that was it because alcohol can hit me rather quickly, and I think Mandy could tell that I was a little tipsy, because she would nudge my leg with her nose every time I would try to get up and walk. After a while, we all got pretty tired, so my nurse and her sister helped me get to where I would be sleeping for the night. My nurse was starting my IV fluids and feedings, and helped me get hooked up to my oxygen machine. And of course, Mandy, being the big love bug that she is, had to lay right on top of my legs. My nurse hooked up the wireless oxygen monitor, so that she could take the monitor in the other room and make sure I was still breathing good, and she would also be aware if anything accidentally got disconnected or something. After being passed out for a while, I woke up in the middle of the night, and I felt like I was suffocating. It was very hard for me to breathe, and I was also feeling very lightheaded. I thought this was strange, since I shouldn't be having these symptoms, as I was hooked into an oxygen machine. But I turned over and saw the same guy standing right next to my machine. This absolute nutcase had disconnected the oxygen tube from the machine and was holding it in his hand. Before the guy could make another move, Mandy jumped off the bed and tore into the intruder. She got a hold of the guy pretty good and bit down hard, and believe me when I say, he was not having a good night. Since the monitor started beeping very loud, my nurse and her sister came into the room, wondering what the hell was going on. They saw the man on the floor with Mandy right on top of him. They also noticed that he was holding my oxygen tube. My nurse pried it from his hands and connected it back to the machine. She made sure that I was breathing good while her sister called the police. I finally told Mandy to get off the man, because one of my nurse's cousins came in and stood over the intruder, making sure he didn't try and take off. The police finally came and arrested the man and took my statement. It turns out this man was a complete stranger, and nobody knew who he was. He just sort of blended in with everyone else. My nurse stayed with me for the rest of the night to try and calm me down because I was absolutely terrified. She made sure that my oxygen machine was working and that I was breathing good. Mandy could sense that I was scared, so instead of laying on my feet, she laid right next to me like a big stuffed animal to let me know that everything was okay now. From now on, whenever we have these family gatherings, whoever is hosting them always makes sure that they only allow people that they know to come in. For starters, my name is Rose, and I'm 19. I'm from the Netherlands, and I study law. I mainly chose to go to law school because of this occurrence. I was only 16 at the time. I was what the Americans would call a sophomore in high school. I was, and still am, very picky with who I choose to be friends with, so I had about 5 real friends at the time. This is very important for the story. It all started one night when I decided to go out to the only bar in my town that allowed 16-year-olds inside. We weren't allowed to drink, but we had pre-gamed, so whatever. It's very common in Holland for teenagers to start drinking at the age of 16. I was out with about 3 of my friends, and for the sake of the story I'll call them Jordan, Lisa, and Maddie. I was dating Jordan at this time. He was 19. Jordan brought his younger brother along, who was 16. We will call him Joe. We were all just hanging out and having fun, and I noticed that I got along very well with Joe. In the days following, I started to receive texts from Joe. He was saying stuff like, "Hey, let's go out again soon." I brushed it off as him trying to be friendly, as he didn't have a whole lot of friends from what I've heard. Joe and I developed a great friendship over the following months. I came over a lot and hung out with Joe, Jordan, and their parents, and I developed a good bond with them as well. After a few weeks, I began to receive random phone calls. I would pick up and say, "Hi, this is Rose," but the person on the other end of the line wouldn't say anything. The only thing I would hear was just heavy breathing. I thought it was a prank at first, but when that number called me 30 to 40 times in 2 hours, I was starting to become a little frightened. I went from calling every once in a while to being called about 60 times a day. I tried blocking the number, but as soon as I did, a new number would call me. And when I would answer, the only thing I would hear would be that same heavy breathing. I eventually told my parents, and they thought it was strange, but they didn't take me serious. When I told Jordan, Maddie, and Joe, however, they took it extremely serious. The phone calls eventually stopped for a while, and the whole thing just slowly seeped into the back of my mind, and eventually I rarely ever thought about them. That was until I was out shopping with Maddie. I received another phone call. However, I had just recently applied for a job, and I thought it may have been the company calling me. I picked it up, and I immediately felt my heart pounding in my chest as I heard a muffled voice saying,
"My sweet Rose, you look so gorgeous in your green jacket. It really brings out your blue eyes."
I freaked out and started to look around. I was brought out of my initial panic as I heard the voice say,
"Don't bother. You can't see me, but I can clearly see you."
I hung up after that. I took the bus home that day in tears, with Maddie being as freaked out as I was. I told my parents, and yet again, they brushed it off. They told me it was probably a prank phone call. So I was left thinking, if it was just a prank phone call, then why would the caller make sure his number wasn't visible? This went on for months, and I fell into a 24/7 state of paranoia. I was scared to leave the house, and I didn't eat a whole lot, and I would just stay in bed all day if I could. Of course, I had school, and at this time I was getting at least 40 phone calls every day. Jordan, Maddie, and Joe, and eventually my parents, were my biggest supporters through this whole thing. At least one of them would pick me up and drop me off at home, and if my parents were at work, someone would stay home with me until my parents came home. just to make sure that I was safe. However, things took a turn for the worst when all of my friends started receiving the same phone calls, and the caller also started blowing up my house phone. I would leave my phone at home a lot when I went to school. Either Joe, Jordan, or Maddie would let my parents know where I was. I also started receiving these weird, twisted love letters. One of them read,
"Hello, Rosie. You looked so beautiful the other day. With all your hair curled up like that, it made me want to cut some of it off. I wish I could just cut your whole beautiful head off. But I can't do that. You would just be too quiet for me. I have thought about it though. Cutting your head off and taking out your eyeballs. Those baby blue eyes of yours. I will see you soon. Sooner than you think."
I have tears in my eyes just from reading it. After many phone calls, and me either declining or just not picking up, I had the guts to pick up the phone, and I told the caller that I wanted to meet them. I wasn't planning on going alone, so Joe offered to come with me, since Jordan had to work and Maddie had dance practice. So we rode our bikes to a nearby park, where I had agreed to meet the caller. I sat down on a bench with my heart nearly beating out of my chest. Joe hid in the bushes behind me with a baseball bat, in case the caller tried to grab me or hurt me. And of course, nobody showed. We waited for around 2 hours for nothing. After I got back home, I received another phone call. This time, the caller wasn't as sweet as he usually was. He called me a dumb bitch and a whore. He told me that he was disappointed in me for thinking that he was so stupid that he would not notice that I brought Joe along. I hung up, and from that point on, all the phone calls I received were violent, with the caller threatening to kill me or hurt my family. He also told me that he was the one for me, and that Jordan was just a phase. I went to go grab my bike so I could make my way to the police station, and that's when I noticed that there was a shoebox tied to it. I immediately started to panic. I opened it up, and there was a dead rat inside. I remember screaming at the top of my lungs, and then I broke down crying. With the box still attached to my bike, I took off to the police station. It usually took me about 30 minutes from my house to get to the station. However, on that day, it only took me 15. I gave them my statement, and they took it extremely serious. They placed a wiretap on my phone, and the phones of my friends and my parents shortly after. I let everyone know. Only after a few weeks of silence, the phone call started again. The caller told me that he knew about the police listening into the conversations. He also said that he was going to come by my house at night, kill me, and then rape my dead body. I became numb at this point. Things had gotten so hopeless that I didn't see a point of living another day in this hell. I remember it like it was just yesterday. It was on the 19th of July, 2016. I had just turned 17, and I was over at Jordan's house. I was actually kind of relaxed in some weird way. The police kept me updated on everything they found. Jordan and I were on the couch when suddenly the doorbell rang. Jordan opened the front door to 3 cops standing just outside. One of them was the detective that I had the most contact with. He was in charge of the investigation, I think. He came straight over to me and grabbed my hands, looked me dead in the eyes, and told me 2 simple words: "It's over." I couldn't believe what he was saying at first. The other 2 officers went upstairs as I was talking to the detective. When they came back down, Joe was in handcuffs. At first, I thought it was a mistake, but as soon as I saw Joe's defeated face, I became infuriated. I screamed at Joe, asking him why. Jordan was yelling at him as well. He was shocked at first, but as soon as he understood the situation, he freaked out. Jordan's mom began crying, and honestly, I felt bad for her. Soon after, the cops left, with Joe. The detective stayed behind and explained to us that Joe had bought prepaid SIM cards, and used them on an old phone that he had laying around. He told me that he knew it was Joe when they listened to a very bizarre conversation he had on the phone. Apparently, Joe dialed his house number with his prepaid phone. He made sure that he was the one that picked up the house phone. He yelled at the phone, screaming that the caller was a coward. I know it sounds insane, but Joe was the only one talking, so that made it crystal clear, and it also explains why the caller never showed up that day at the park. He was already there. Joe was taken into custody and was sentenced to 2 years in prison. He was released last year. While he was incarcerated, I did visit him once to get answers to some of the questions I had. Joe told me that he was in love with me and wanted nothing more than to be with me. He told me that he was sorry for putting me through so much misery, but I don't think I can ever forgive him. Jordan and I are no longer together. I just couldn't face him anymore. Every single time I looked at him, I was reminded of Joe and the pain that he put me through. Thankfully, me and Jordan are still on friendly terms. I'm still in therapy because of all of this. I just really don't know how to move forward. The only thing I know for sure is that I never want to see Joe ever again. Me and my group of friends all like to fancy ourselves as seasoned urban explorers, though we rarely ever actually go out and explore abandoned buildings. The few times that we have, however, we've gone to see some pretty interesting spots, one of which I'm writing about today. I don't feel comfortable disclosing the name of this place, but it's in the mid-Atlantic area of the United States. It's actually a place where the Proper People and Dan Bell, two popular urbex YouTubers, met up and explored together. I've searched the comment sections high and low to see if anybody has openly identified this place, and so far they haven't. I do, however, recommend that you go and check out their videos. It will give you an idea of just how creepy this place actually is. If you thought what they saw was creepy, they just went into one building, specifically the most visitor-friendly one. There are 6 others on that property that are all connected by underground tunnels. This place is in the middle of nowhere, short of the police station, which is conveniently located next to it. You may think that with the cops being so close to this place, and the added risk of a $500 fine would scare us off, but as you can tell, it did not. This place is known for squatters to stay at night, year-round, and on top of that, the property owner uses it as his own personal shooting range at all times of the day. There are bullet holes in just about every door and wall of this place. Looking back, it was dumb as hell to ever go there, but it did produce a good story to tell. Speaking of which, let's get into what happened. The friends that were with me that night were Kyle, Ross, Ben, and Adam. We've all been close friends for years. Kyle is the oldest by a few years, and whenever we do something as a full group, he usually takes the reins. This was one of those nights. I remember him saying completely casually, "Let's break into an abandoned mental hospital." It was like a suggestion to go grab pizza, or to go down to the drugstore to buy some junk food. He was the only person that wanted to do it, but with him being the self-appointed leader for the night, we followed after him and got into his car. He had no idea where the place was, and we ended up getting lost in this quiet country bumpkin town. At this time, it was about 9:45 p.m., and it was December, so it was just as dark as if it were midnight. We drove around for a little while, and almost headed back home, when I jokingly mentioned that we should shine our flashlights out the window until we found the damn place. It was only a joke at first, until Ross started actually doing it. One by one, we all pointed our flashlights into the darkness, hoping to find where the place was. It took a good 10 to 15 minutes, but I was the one who spotted it. In fact, I knew where it was before I even saw it with my flashlight. I joked around with the guys about how ironic it would be if it were directly next to the police station. And then I felt like there was some sort of presence off to the right of the car. I saw a looming silhouette of a desolate building a few hundred feet from the car, and simply said, "There it is." It took some pointing out for the other guys in the car to even see it. Kyle parked his sedan in some fancy neighborhood right near the place, and my friends Ben and Adam announced that there was no way in hell they were going in. I told Ross and Kyle that I was staying with the other two, but after some persuasion, I finally gave in. At this point, I was regretting pointing out the place. We trudged through some muddy area until we came upon a field next to the hospital. After 10 minutes of walking the perimeter near the woods, we found a trail that led through a bunch of thorn bushes in the direction of our destination. I had taken the lead, with Kyle more or less babysitting Ross. If we were caught here, we knew it would all be his fault. He was flashing his light at the road and making the biggest ruckus imaginable, doing the exact opposite of keeping a low profile. After getting pricked by those sticker bushes a few dozen times, we arrived at the back of Building 1, witnessing the silhouette of the structure and a radio tower rising from the ground as we walked through the small valley. Without our lights, we would have seen next to nothing. There was shattered glass laying everywhere, rusty stains on the ground, and pieces of wall crumbling into the earth around us. We found a door and listened carefully to hear if there was anyone inside, while scanning the window for any other light sources. There were no sounds coming from the building, and there were no signs of the owner, squatters, or any other groups. It was eerily quiet, and it felt wrong. The loudest sounds was our own breathing and heartbeats. We could hear a slight breeze rustling the trees about 200 feet away. We then went inside. I was wearing brand new shoes at the time. They were my first pair of Adidas, which I had been wanting to own a pair for years. And I was now walking on a powdered, moldy drywall-coated floor with chunks of glass laying about everywhere. I would have been worried about my shoes if I wasn't so preoccupied with worrying about everything else that could go wrong. Wires were hanging from the ceiling. The walls were littered with bad-quality graffiti, mostly just vulgar words, and Instagram addresses. Though this was regular abandoned building kind of stuff, it still gave me the chills. I absolutely hated hospitals, even the waiting rooms of ones that are fully operational. But this place was a whole new level. It was both a hospital and an asylum. And all I could think about was how many people died here, and how many mentally ill people were dumped here by their families, to be forgotten about. We poked around room after room, and found little to nothing on the second floor, which was the first area we thoroughly explored, aside from the first floor lobby area. We ascended another flight of stairs, and the graffiti got more and more sparse as we went further into the building. There was one room that had "Rape Room" sprawled on its closed doors, which unsettled all three of us as I read it out loud. There wasn't much discussion among us as we poked around, other than us trying to keep track of each other. The closest thing to any signs of life was a box of anti-diarrhea medication. The year written on the box was 1994, which means that it was older than me by a few years. It was an old box, sure, but we did note that this was the type of medication that you can get high off of. And I kept that in the back of my mind to look for any other signs that maybe a homeless addict was wandering around here. That was the last thing I wanted to encounter in this place. We made our way to the fourth floor, and it was by far the most damaged, from water leaking through the ceiling. We were scared to open every closed door on this level, but as expected, they were all empty. No bugs were even in this place. We found a staircase at the other end of the hall that went down and took it. On the ground floor, there was one direction that was entirely blocked by chained-up doors, and the other way was the place that we had entered from, which I pressured my friends to take. However, they took a third option, which was to follow the steps down below the surface, to the basement area. Written on the wall facing where we left the stairs was a message that said, "Portal to Hell," with an arrow pointing downward. I assumed that it was the morgue, and began falling deeper into a panicked state. After getting a hold of myself and Kyle looking around the corner, we realized it was a hallway so long that we couldn't see the end. This was one of the tunnels I had mentioned earlier. Obviously, we started walking that way. I felt a bit safer here for some reason. We could see hundreds of feet in both directions, and there was no risk of any form of authority seeing our lights from outside. The echoes of our footsteps made it sound like we were a group of 5 or 6 people, instead of just 3. We stopped multiple times to listen, expecting to see some other person there, but it was just the echoes playing tricks on our minds. I recalled some horrifying YouTube comment about somebody seeing or imagining a pair of disembodied eyes floating around the hospital. At this point, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, I expected to see a pair of eyes looking back. We traversed through the tunnels for maybe 15 to 20 minutes, and then we decided to head back. It was mostly my decision. All of my whining was finally having an effect on my friends. We retraced our steps and found everything as it had been when we passed through earlier. But even with everything being perfectly in place, I had a feeling deep down like something was wrong, like something horrible was about to happen, and I could tell that Kyle and Ross were experiencing the same thing. I expected to be relieved when stepping out of this building, but I felt no different. We texted the other guys that were still waiting in the car, just to let them know that we were heading back. We started making our way through the small valley again. Then Kyle stopped dead in his tracks and stared forward. Ross and I were confused, and we asked him what was up. He then whispered, "Shut the fuck up." He then began crouching. We both got the memo and did the same. After me and Ross exchanged worried glances, Kyle whispered, "There's a car. No, a truck on the other side of this hill." The path that we took to get into the building was the lowest point in this area. Right across where we had gone up the hill, a pickup truck was parked, facing down the hill. I seriously doubt we would have missed this 3,000-pound hunk of metal on the way up, so the most rational explanation was that somebody else had shown up while we were in the tunnels. Every obvious entrance was heavily gated and locked, which meant this person either drove around off-road or was that trigger-happy owner. I don't really have anything against owning guns for self-defense or for hunting, but the only kind of person that would buy a 250-acre decrepit mental hospital and proceed to pump the walls full of lead wasn't the kind of person that I wanted to run into while I was out here, whether I was trespassing or not. With Ross being a bit unreliable, and me in the middle of having a nervous breakdown, Kyle went ahead and checked if anybody was in there. He stayed on the edge of the valley and used what little moonlight there was to silently navigate to the vehicle and see if it was empty. After a surprisingly short amount of time, his head appeared above the hill, and he yelled to us that it was safe. We tracked back the same exact way we had gotten there, all the while nervously checking to see if the truck had moved, or if we could see anybody in the building. We didn't notice any movement or lights, and heard no sounds that seemed out of the ordinary. It wasn't until we were about 30 feet away from the road that we heard something echo out all around us. At first, I thought a tree limb had snapped above me, but the stillness that followed proved me wrong. We then heard 2 more, and realized what was happening. The owner was here, and we narrowly missed a confrontation with him. He was quite obviously armed, and once again, that's the last kind of person you want to bump into while wandering around a vacant asylum. Me, Kyle, and Ross all hurried up the last hill to get to the road, and sat there for a few minutes listening to more sounds, and explaining to our other 2 friends what happened, and what we had just narrowly missed. We left shortly after, anxious to get anywhere but there. We stopped at a Wawa gas station afterwards. Kyle put some gas in the car, and the others grabbed some sodas and some junk food. My shoes were fine for the most part, aside from some dust that had collected at the bottom. We all went back home, and we actually ended up returning to that place albeit very carefully and during the day. We even ran into other groups of explorers. I'm not sure when, but I will return to that place, and I plan on going at night. If anything happens that's worth telling about, I'll be sure to update as soon as possible. If any of you happen to find out what this place is called and where it's located, which I don't think will be an easy task, I'm warning you now not to go in. But if you do, make sure you're prepared in every possible way and exercise extreme caution. By just a minute or two, I miss being taken out of that place in cuffs, or even worse, a body bag. Hey everyone, thank you for tuning into this episode of Based on True Events. If you enjoyed these narrations and would like your story to be featured in this series, please send in your written experience to unit522stories@outlook.com. I look forward to hearing from you. Until next time, I'm your Uncle Unit, and as always, never forget. There's always a reason to be afraid.